The HOA called 911 on me for standing in the lake I legally bought. I knew something was wrong the second their president waded chest-deep into my water, screaming that everything the lake touches belonged to them. From that moment on, doubt turned into tension, tension into confrontation, and confrontation into a truth they never expected the Army Corps to uncover. Stick with me. This one twists fast. And if you're into real stories about land, justice, and standing your ground, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the next fight. The first light of day rolled over Willow Basin like a soft breath, brushing the tops of the lodgepole pines and spreading gold across the still water. I stood barefoot on the dock I'd hammered back together the night before, letting the chill from the planks rise into my feet. Wyoming mornings always felt honest, cold, clear, and unforgiving in a way that made a man pay attention. My coffee steamed beside me, resting on the scarred railing, while I dipped a small probe into the lake to check temperature and oxygen levels. Old habits die slow. 15 years as a dam safety engineer had trained me to trust the numbers before anything else. The lake responded in gentle ripples, glassy and unbothered. This place was supposed to be my restart. 47 acres of quiet water and pine-shadowed shoreline I'd bought free and clear after years of saving and more years thinking about escaping the noise of town life. No HOA, no neighbors pounding on my door, no committees with opinions on the color of my shed. Just me and the water. I exhaled, letting my shoulders loosen for the first time in months. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of water being pushed aside by someone moving far too fast and far too angry. "Hey, you! Off our lake, immediately!" The voice sliced across the water like a blade. I turned, confused, as 3 figures waded into the shallows from the east shore. 3 women in matching coral jackets, hair pinned tight, clipboards held high above the splashing. At the front was a woman whose expression alone could curdle milk. The fuchsia blazer she wore looked expensive, the kind that didn't expect to be baptized at 7 in the morning. Her lipstick matched it perfectly, even as the hem darkened from lake water. I blinked. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "You can start," she barked, marching deeper, now up to her waist, "by stepping off HOA property before you're fined for trespassing. This is a managed lake, our lake." I stared at her. The mist rose gently from the water. A loon called somewhere upriver, and this woman, this stranger, was storming into my lake like she intended to repossess it by sheer force of will. I'm Remy," I said, keeping my voice level. "Remy Cole. I bought this lake 3 days ago. Deeds filed. I'm just doing a water check." She stopped dead in the water, arms stiff, chin angled downward like I'd stepped on her foot. "That's impossible." One of the board members leaned in. "Bethany," he said, bought. Bethany Reed, I realized. The HOA president. Of course her name was Bethany. She jabbed a dripping finger toward me. "This is Willow Basin Estates. Our covenants cover this entire watershed. That means every inch of shoreline, every dock, every boat, every—" She scanned dramatically around us. "Surface of this community lake." I scratched my jaw. "Bethany, this lake isn't part of your subdivision. My deed shows full lake bed ownership. The previous owner wasn't even in an HOA." She let out a laugh so sharp it scared a mallard into flight. "Oh, you poor thing. Someone scammed you. The HOA has managed these waters for 21 years. You're trespassing, sir. And I am calling the sheriff." I opened my mouth to argue, but she already had her phone up, screen dripping, voice pitched to maximum outrage. "Yes, this is an emergency. We have a hostile trespasser refusing to leave HOA waters. Yes, immediately." "Hostile?" I muttered. I'm standing barefoot on my dock holding a thermometer. One of the board members scribbled something down with a soggy pen. The moment stretched uncomfortably. My coffee had gone cold. My patience, too. A familiar rumble echoed across the dirt road above the shoreline. An engine I knew well. Sheriff Marcus Hale's aging Ford rolled into view, dust puffing from the tires like little explosions. He killed the engine and stepped out slow, squinting at the spectacle of 3 HOA board members neck-deep in water, and me standing on the dock like a man watching a magic trick gone wrong. Marcus rested his thumbs behind his belt buckle. "Morning, Remy. You making friends?" Bethany spun toward him. "Sheriff, arrest this man. He refuses to leave HOA property." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Bethany, you're standing in the lake." "Because he is trespassing in it." Marcus sighed, the sigh of a man who'd been dealing with this HOA for far too long. "Let's slow down a second. Remy, you got paperwork for buying this place?" "In my truck," I said. "Happy to show it." Bethany splashed forward. "Sheriff, the HOA owns everything the water touches. Everything. Our covenants are ironclad." Marcus scratched the back of his neck, looking between us, clearly caught between 2 different versions of reality and one very soggy HOA president. "Bethany," he said carefully, "it's unusual for an HOA to claim a whole lake. Real unusual." "It is our lake," she snapped, "and he is about to learn that the hard way." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Not fear, confusion. Why was she so certain? Why were her board members nodding like backup dancers? And why would anyone march waist-deep into a lake at sunrise unless they genuinely believed they owned it? Marcus looked at me, then at her, then back at me. "All right," he said quietly. "Somebody better show me something real soon, because this doesn't look right." And in that early Wyoming light, standing barefoot on the dock I owned, facing down an HOA president dripping lake water in fury, a single question burned hotter than the rising sun. Why was the HOA so confident they owned a lake I'd legally bought? Bethany Reed slogged back toward the shallows, water swirling around her blazer like it was trying to drag her under. Her 2 board members followed, clutching clipboards that had soaked through so much they drooped in their hands. Sheriff Marcus Hale stood on the gravel bank, boots planted wide, arms folded, watching the 3 of them with the kind of exhausted patience he usually reserved for elk hunting season when tourists tried to pet wildlife. "Remy," he said, "go get your paperwork." I walked up the dock, the boards creaking beneath me. My truck waited near the split-rail fence, dew still clinging to the windshield. As I opened the passenger door, a gust of wind kicked up from the valley, scattering dust and the smell of pine needles into the air. I grabbed the waterproof envelope containing my deed and headed back toward the shore. Bethany saw the folder and inhaled sharply, like she was bracing for a punch. "Whatever you think you bought," she snapped, "I promise you, it isn't this lake." Her voice carried across the water, brittle and sharp. I handed Marcus the envelope. "Filed 3 days ago. Transferred from the previous owner, Don Caldwell. Lake bed, water rights, shoreline access, the whole thing." Marcus flipped through the pages slowly. He wasn't a man who rushed paperwork. He'd once taken 20 minutes to read a parking complaint involving a goat. When he got to the signature page, he raised his brows. "Looks legitimate." Bethany's face flushed a color that didn't occur in nature. "Legitimate?" she barked. "Sheriff, the HOA has controlled this lake since the subdivision was established," one of the board members chimed in, voice trembling. "It's in the covenants." The other board member shook out her clipboard like a wet dog, sending droplets everywhere. "We brought the documents. They were printed last night." Printed last night. That didn't inspire confidence. Bethany snatched the clipboard from her. "Sheriff, look at this." She thrust the dripping stack toward him. Marcus stared at the soggy pages like they were a wounded animal. "Bethany, these are soaked." "They're readable," she insisted, peeling off a page that tore halfway down the center. He sighed and carefully held the top sheet between 2 fingers. The ink had bled so much it looked like a watercolor painting of legal text. I can't make out half of this. That's because he forced us into the lake, she shrieked, pointing at me as if I had conjured the water myself. We had to confront him before he contaminated community property. I blinked. I was holding a thermometer. A breeze lifted the edges of the wet HOA pages and peeled one free. It fluttered down the shoreline like a wounded bird before landing in the mud. One of the board members scrambled after it, slipping in the muck, muttering something about chain of command. The whole scene would have been funny if it weren't so damn strange. Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose. All right, Bethany, I'll hear you out. What exactly gives the HOA ownership of this lake? Her chin lifted another inch. Section 14, Amendment 3B of the Willow Basin Estates Covenant. Authority over all community waters, including lake-based assets, docks, boats, and shoreline facilities. I narrowed my eyes. Bethany, Willow Basin Estates ends a half-mile east of here. The subdivision doesn't even touch this lake. The previous owner made a point of staying outside HOA jurisdiction. Then he lied, she snapped. Or you were tricked. Either way, you cannot be here. Something in her tone wasn't just stubborn. It was fear wrapped in arrogance, fighting its way out. Before I could respond, a soft scraping sound drifted across the water. All three of us turned. A small aluminum rowboat was drifting in from the fog, its oars dipping slow and steady. The man rowing looked carved from driftwood. Gray beard, weathered skin, shoulders still broad despite his age. He wore a wide-brimmed hat low over his eyes. The early light caught the boat just right, making it appear from the mist like something out of an old western. He wasn't fishing. He wasn't sightseeing. He was watching closely. As he got closer, I realized he was looking directly at me. Bethany muttered under her breath, "Oh no, not him." The rowboat drifted to a stop about 20 yards from shore. The man rested his oars across his lap. "Morning, Sheriff," he called in a gravelly voice. Marcus nodded. "Morning, Elias." Something in my gut tightened. Elias Tanner. I'd heard the name once, years ago, from my father, spoken in that offhand way men do when talking about someone who mattered to them long ago. I hadn't thought about it since. Elias tapped the brim of his hat. "Remy Cole. Haven't seen you since you were, 8? 9? My breath hitched. "You knew my dad?" He nodded slowly. "Worked with him. On this very lake." Bethany stiffened like she'd been struck. Elias continued, voice steady as the water beneath him. "He told me that one day, someone would come along with a deed in their hands and a fight on their doorstep." His gaze drifted toward Bethany. "Looks like that day's here." The wind died. The lake stilled. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Bethany's voice cracked. "Elias, you don't know what you're talking about. This lake is HOA jurisdiction." Elias chuckled softly. "Bethany, I've been living on this water longer than your covenants have had ink, and I know exactly what's buried at the bottom of this lake. And what your board conveniently pretends doesn't exist." Her face went pale under the morning light. My heart hammered once, hard. "Elias," I said quietly, "what exactly did my dad work on here?" He lifted one oar, pointed toward the middle of the lake. "Something the HOA doesn't ever want found." A chill crept up my spine. Marcus looked between us, concern settling on his face. "Elias, what are you saying?" Elias leaned forward, eyes cutting sharp through the thinning mist. "I'm saying this lake doesn't belong to the HOA. It never did." Bethany sucked in a breath like she'd been punched. And before I could ask another question, the wind shifted again, blowing hard enough to rip a cluster of wet covenant pages from Bethany's hands. They scattered into the air like confetti, pages of a story that suddenly didn't match the truth rising from the water. I stared at the drifting papers, then at the old man in the rowboat, then back at Bethany's trembling hands. Something deeper was going on here. Something deliberate. Something my father had known. And I wasn't leaving until I found out what. The mist had thinned to wisps curling over the glassy surface, revealing more of the lake's quiet expanse. Elias Tanner sat motionless in his rowboat, hands steady on the oars, like he'd drifted straight out of the past. The morning sun had risen just enough to cast long shadows over the pines, and the silence settled heavier than before, like the entire basin waited to hear what he'd say next. Bethany Reed shifted uneasily on the rocky shoreline, wringing out the cuff of her blazer with trembling fingers. Her two board members hovered behind her, exchanging glances, unsure whether to be afraid of Elias, the lake, or the truth he hinted at. Sheriff Marcus Hale stepped closer to the water, boots crunching on gravel. "Elias," he said quietly, "what exactly do you mean by that?" Elias rested one elbow against the rim of the boat. "I mean, this lake ain't what the HOA thinks it is, and Remy's father knew that better than anyone." His gaze drifted to me. Caleb Cole was the sharpest hydrologist the Corps ever had. He didn't just test water, he mapped it, measured it, and sometimes protected it. The hairs on my arms rose. I swallowed. Protected it from what? Elias's eyes softened, the way older men look at someone they knew as a child. From anyone trying to claim it who had no right. Bethany snapped, "This is nonsense. Sheriff, he's just trying to confuse the issue. The HOA has established authority." Elias turned toward her so suddenly that she stumbled back a step. His voice stayed calm, low, and certain. "Bethany, I've watched your board tug on this lake like it's a loose thread, and you know exactly what happens when someone tugs too hard." Her face drained of color. The wind shifted again, sharp, carrying the scent of pine sap and cold water. It pressed the moment closer, like nature itself leaned in. I took a step forward. "Elias, my father never mentioned federal work out here. He talked about dams, watershed surveys, but never this lake." "Because he couldn't," Elias replied. "Not unless you had the right clearance, and not while certain folks were trying to bury the truth." Bethany's jaw clenched. "Sheriff, are we really going to let him stir up conspiracy theories? This lake is part of Willow Basin Estates and always has been." Elias lifted an eyebrow. "Always? Funny. I remember the day they tried to fold this lake into the subdivision. Your board printed a fancy brochure claiming community rights. But the Corps sent notice, clear as a mountain stream. You remember that, don't you?" Bethany's lips parted, but no sound came out. A single water droplet slipped from her blazer sleeve and hit the lake with a tiny, perfect ripple. Sheriff Marcus slowly crossed his arms. "Bethany, you got something you want to add?" She shot him a furious glance. "Sheriff, the HOA has every right to manage this lake. We're simply enforcing community standards." Elias snorted softly. "Is that what you call it? Charging folks for using water you don't own? Putting up signs you had no legal right to post? Pretending you didn't get those notices from the federal office?" The board members behind her stiffened. I felt my stomach tighten. This was bigger than territorial posturing. "Elias," I said, "you mentioned deep water surveys. You and my dad worked together? On what?" His jaw tightened. He looked down at the oars, then back at me. "We were looking for markers, Remy. Boundary indicators, environmental tags, federal seals, things that tell you what land and water belongs to who." "Markers?" I repeated. "As in, underwater markers?" He nodded once. Bethany blurted out, "There are no markers. If there were, we would have found them." He gave her a smile that held more truth than kindness. "Oh, you found them all right. Just didn't like what they said." My pulse hammered in my throat. Sheriff Hale rumbled, "All right, Bethany. That sound like something your board should have disclosed?" She crossed her arms tightly, shivering in her wet clothes. Sheriff, those markers, if they even existed, were irrelevant. Old, unverified. Federal property isn't irrelevant, Elias cut in. Not unless you think ignoring it makes it go away. I watched her eyes dart toward the lake, toward the board members, toward the road, as if every direction offered a lie and no escape. A gust of wind kicked up, sending a cluster of pine needles tumbling across the water. The ripples they made were small, but they spread far. That's how it felt. Like one sentence from Elias had turned the whole situation into something much bigger than an HOA argument. I stepped closer to the shoreline, my boots sinking a little into the damp earth. Elias, why would the HOA ignore federal markers? Why push this hard over a lake that isn't theirs? His expression grew serious, sharper, heavier. Because they've been using this lake for years, Remy. As leverage, as income, as control. They thought no one would ever question it. He paused. Until someone came along with a deed in their hand, and your father's blood in their veins. The board members' clipboards shook. Even the water seemed to still. Bethany swallowed hard, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Sheriff, this is going too far. Marcus didn't move. I think we're just getting started. A shadow fell across the lake as a cloud drifted in front of the sun. Elias dipped one oar and nudged his boat closer. Remy, he said quietly, your father didn't trust many people, but he trusted me. And he told me something before he passed, something I didn't think I'd ever repeat. He paused. He said the lake holds more truth than the people fighting over it, and that when the time came, the right person would uncover it. Bethany sucked in a sharp breath. Sheriff, stop this! He's manipulating him! No, Elias replied. Your fear is what's manipulating you. The wind stopped. The lake froze in its quiet stillness. The world narrowed to a single moment. Sheriff Hale turned to me. Remy, you got any idea what your dad was talking about? My throat felt tight. No, but I'm about to find out. Elias nodded, a man relieved that the first step had finally been taken. Good, he said, because what lies under this lake is the reason the HOA is fighting so hard. The surface rippled as a breeze finally returned, pushing the rowboat just a foot back. The sun broke through the cloud again, lighting the water in pale gold. Elias pointed the tip of his oar toward the center of the lake. That's where your answers are. And I felt the shift, subtle but certain. The battle over the lake had become something else entirely. Not a dispute, a revelation waiting to surface. The wind shifted again, lifting the thin fog from the lake and pushing it toward the pines like a curtain being pulled aside. With Elias's rowboat bobbing gently and Bethany Reed frozen on the gravel, everything felt suspended, caught between the truth and the moment it would break free. I stepped back from the water's edge and headed toward my truck, gravel crunching beneath my boots. The air smelled like wet stone and morning cold, sharp enough to clear any doubt from a man's head. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a thick, weather-worn map folder, one my father had labeled in his tight, slanted handwriting, Willow Basin, Keep. I had never opened it until today. Carrying it back toward the dock felt like carrying a live wire. Sheriff Marcus Hale watched me carefully, as if he knew this wasn't just paperwork, but a fuse. I knelt on the dock and unlatched the folder. Inside, wrapped in an old Coors-issued waterproof sleeve, was a folded topographic survey map. The edges were frayed. The paper smelled faintly of machine oil and time. My father must have handled it dozens of times, maybe more. Bethany scoffed loudly. What is that, Remy? DIY arts and crafts? It proves nothing. Marcus cut her off with a raised hand. Let him show it. I unfolded the map slowly. The creases crackled in the cool air. Bright red marker lines traced the lake's perimeter, and along the north ridge, stamped in faded ink, were the letters: U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Navigable Waters, Designation, Federal Oversight Area. Elias nodded in grim satisfaction. There it is. Bethany's face blanched so fast it looked like someone had switched off her blood supply. The board members behind her stared, mouths parted, clipboards forgotten at their sides. Sheriff Hale walked closer. "Remy," he murmured, "this is official?" "It's core paper," I said. My voice felt tight, but steady. My father kept it hidden. I didn't know why. Elias leaned on his oar. "Your father didn't hide it. He protected it. Big difference." I pointed to the boundary markings. "See this? The lake's waterline, the bed, the outflow, they're all under federal classification. That means the HOA has no authority here. Zero." Bethany didn't blink. She didn't breathe. Her pupils were tiny, like someone caught in a lie too big to swallow. That map is outdated," she choked out. "Meaningless. The HOA has been managing these waters for years. The Corps doesn't care about a tiny lake in Wyoming. The Corps cares about all navigable waters," Marcus said flatly, "especially ones marked like this." "You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped, but her voice was trembling. Just a little. Just enough. The wind shifted again. It rustled the pines along the ridge and caught the edges of the map, lifting corners as if urging the truth forward. I steadied the paper. "Bethany, the fact this exists is a problem. A huge one. Your HOA has been running this lake like it's your personal asset, charging residents, posting rules, threatening people." She backed up until her heels hit the soft mud. "Sheriff, he's making this whole thing up. He bought that map online. It's fake. Look at him. He's trying to take over community property." "Community property with a federal seal?" Elias said with a low laugh. "You better come up with a better lie than that." Her breathing grew ragged. One board member, the shorter woman with trembling hands, took a step away from her. "Bethany, you told us the lake was ours because the original developer donated the rights." He did," Bethany barked. He must have. The covenants don't include federal water," Marcus interrupted. "They can't override federal law." Bethany whirled on him, voice cracking. "Sheriff, arrest him! Arrest him for presenting falsified documents, for tampering, for—" But Marcus didn't move. Instead, he thumbed the radio clipped to his shoulder. "This is Hale. I need federal verification on a Corps navigable waters map at Willow Basin Lake. Dispatch, get me connected to the Army Corps field office." Bethany's jaw dropped open. You can't call them here," she screamed. That settled everything. Elias muttered, "And there it is." I stared at her. "Bethany, why would you panic over a routine verification unless you already knew what they'd say?" Her face twisted, as if she were holding back a dozen secrets at once. Marcus lowered the radio. "They're sending someone. Should be here within the hour." The board members exchanged horrified looks. Bethany didn't blink. Her voice lowered to something brittle and razor-thin. "You have no idea what you've done." I folded the map carefully and tucked it back into its sleeve. "I think I'm finding out." Elias dipped his oars once, drifting closer to the dock. "Sheriff," he called, "you might want to ask her why the HOA tried dredging the north side 2 summers ago without a state permit, or why they blocked off the west inlet with an illegal gate 3 years back." The board members' faces turned ashen. Bethany snapped, "Elias, shut your mouth." But the old man just smiled. "I'm too old to shut it," he said, "and too tired of watching you pretend." I felt a tremor of anger under my skin. Not the hot kind, but the steady kind. The kind that comes from seeing a puzzle start to align. I looked directly at her. Bethany, what's at the bottom of this lake that has you fighting this hard? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Rage, fear, stubbornness, they all flickered behind her eyes. Then she said, barely audible, "You don't understand who you're dealing with." But her voice lacked conviction. The breeze picked up again, tugging gently at my shirt, blowing a faint scent of lake moss across the dock. Even the water seemed to hold its breath, and as Sheriff Hale walked toward his patrol truck to wait for the Corps team, Bethany Reed slowly sank onto a fallen log, soaked blazer clinging to her shoulders, staring at the lake like it might swallow her whole. Whatever she feared out there wasn't small, and it certainly wasn't over. The next 20 minutes crawled with the slow weight of approaching consequence. The morning sun climbed higher, burning the mist off the lake until the water shone like polished glass. Sheriff Marcus Hale leaned against the hood of his patrol truck, radio occasionally crackling with updates. Every so often he glanced toward Bethany Reed, who sat rigid on the fallen log, soaked blazer clinging to her like a confession she couldn't peel off. I stood on the dock, elbows resting on the railing, the Corps map tucked safely into my jacket. The breeze carried the faint smell of wet pine and iron-rich soil. My reflection rippled in the lake, uneasy, changed. Elias Tanner's rowboat drifted in slow circles, guided more by the morning current than by any motion of his arms. He watched everything with the patience of a man who'd seen trouble rise and fall too many times to be startled by it. Then the sound came. A low hum first, then the grind of tires over gravel, then the unmistakable thump of a heavy engine built for work, not show. A dusty Army Corps of Engineers vehicle, white with faded red stripes, rounded the bend in the road and descended toward the lake. Dust swirled behind it, rolling like a small storm down the hillside. Bethany's head snapped up, her board members froze. Marcus straightened. And Elias. He smiled as if the moment he'd been waiting decades for had finally arrived. The corpse truck eased to a stop between the big ponderosa pines. The driver door opened, and a woman stepped out, tall, boots hitting the dirt with crisp authority. She wore a dark field jacket with the Corps emblem stitched cleanly on the shoulder. Sunglasses hid her eyes, but her walk said enough. This was someone who dealt in facts, not stories. "Morning," she said, voice clean and even. "I'm Agent Sarah Mitchell, Environmental Crimes Unit. Which one of you called about a boundary dispute?" Her question wasn't hostile, but it cut straight to the bone. Marcus raised a hand. "That'd be me. Sheriff Hale. Thanks for making it out." Sarah nodded. "We were already in the region for a watershed review. Your call caught the district office's attention." She turned her head toward the lake, then toward the HOA board huddled on the shoreline like soggy birds. "Can someone explain why 3 individuals are standing in a federal classified waterway with clipboards?" Bethany jerked to her feet. "This is not a federal waterway. This is community property under HOA authority." Sarah slowly lowered her sunglasses. "Ma'am, did you just say HOA authority over a body of water marked as navigable on corpse records?" Bethany visibly swallowed. Your records are outdated." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Federal classifications do not expire. They update. They do not disappear." She looked to Marcus. "Sheriff, what do you have?" Marcus motioned toward me. "Remy Cole. He bought this lake 3 days ago. Has a clean deed, but Bethany here says the HOA owns everything the water touches." Sarah turned to me. "You have the deed?" I handed her the waterproof folder. She flipped through the pages with practiced efficiency, nodding slowly. "Properly filed, witnessed, recorded, lake bed ownership included." She paused, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Not common, but legal." She handed the papers back, then glanced toward Elias. "Mr. Tanner, I wasn't expecting to see you." Bethany's head snapped toward him. You know her? Elias shrugged. Worked with her office years back. On this lake. Sarah faced him fully. You said there was more than just a boundary issue. Elias pointed with one oar toward the far cove. There is stuff your office put there. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. Understood. Bethany's panic sharpened. Sheriff, Agent Mitchell, he's lying. There is nothing under this lake except mud and fish. Funny you say that, Elias murmured, considering your board tried dredging the north side without a permit. Sarah whipped her head around. Dredging? Without authorization? Bethany sputtered. It was an erosion control measure. Was it? Sarah asked, stepping closer, voice cool and steady. Or were you trying to dig up something you shouldn't? The question sliced the last bit of composure Bethany had. She took a step back, then another, as if the weight of the moment pushed her bodily toward retreat. I watched her closely. Something about the way her eyes darted, not just between us, but toward the lake, told me Elias's warning was dead on. Sarah turned back to me. Mr. Cole, when did you first suspect something was wrong? At sunrise, I said. I was checking water quality on the dock. She came charging at me like I was trespassing. Sarah nodded. And she disputed your deed? Immediately, I said. Before she even looked at it. That caught Sarah's attention. Heard of a lot of boundary disputes, she said, but it's rare someone challenges property ownership before seeing paperwork. Elias cleared his throat. That's because she doesn't need to see it. She already knows what's under there. Sarah exhaled. All right, let's get the story straight. She turned to Bethany. Ma'am, did the HOA receive any federal notices regarding this lake in the past? Bethany held her tongue. One board member whispered, Bethany, you told us to throw those away. Bethany's eyes flared in panic. Don't speak, not one word. But Sarah had heard it. Marcus had heard it. I had heard it. Even the trees felt like they heard it. Sarah's tone hardened. You threw away federal notices? Because they were irrelevant, Bethany shouted. Her voice had cracked so far it barely resembled the commanding tone she'd shown earlier. This is our lake. We've managed it for years. Illegally, Elias muttered. Sarah turned slowly toward him. Is that true? He nodded. They've been charging folks for access, fines, fees, threats, and all on a lake the federal government marked as protected watershed. Sarah pressed her lips together. That's a serious allegation. It's true, I said. I watched her try to find me for standing on my own dock. Sarah paced a few steps, boots kicking up dust that caught the light. Sheriff, we need eyes on the bottom markers. Marcus nodded. We can get divers from the county. No, she said. Corpse divers. We follow our own chain. Bethany broke. Agent Mitchell, I'm telling you, there's no reason for any of this. If you'd just let us handle our community. This, Sarah said sharply, is not community property. The air went still. Even the lake stopped moving. She pointed toward the water. There's federal work down there, and I intend to verify its condition. She faced Marcus next. Sheriff, secure the shoreline. No one enters the water until the Corps divers arrive. Bethany's board members backed away from her, one step at a time. Elias dipped his oar and guided his boat toward the western reeds. You'll want to look near the outflow first. Sarah nodded once. I know. She walked down the dock until she stood beside me. The wind brushed a strand of hair across her jacket collar. Mr. Cole, she said quietly, whatever's under that lake isn't small. I figured, I replied. She turned her sunglasses back toward the water. But I didn't expect the HOA to panic this hard. Something else is going on. What kind of something? I asked. Her jaw tightened. That's what we're here to find out. Behind us, Bethany Reed sat frozen on the log, staring at the immense, quiet lake like it had turned into a courtroom waiting for a verdict. And maybe it had, because in the distance, faint but growing, came the sound of another engine, this one lower, deeper, unmistakably government. The Corps divers were coming, and whatever truth had been hidden beneath that water was about to rise. The distant engine grew louder, rolling through the valley like a low thunder that didn't belong to any storm. The lake, moments ago a shimmering mirror under the Wyoming sun, seemed to hold its breath. Even the birds quieted, settling into the pines along the ridge as if the world knew something was shifting. A second white Corps vehicle came into view, boxy, reinforced, with the kind of utilitarian weight that didn't need branding to announce authority. It rumbled down the dirt road, kicking a tail of dust into the morning air. When it stopped beside Agent Sarah Mitchell's truck, the engine cut off with a confident shudder. Two divers in black dry suits stepped out. Their gear clinked with steel clips, straps, and waterproof cases. They carried themselves with the practiced silence of professionals who didn't need to be told what mattered. Bethany Reed stood slowly from the fallen log, her blazer stiff from drying mud. "No," she breathed, backing away as the divers began unloading equipment. "This is unnecessary. This is a complete overreach." Sarah didn't even look at her. "No one enters the water except Corps personnel." Her voice was steady, clipped, and final. "Sheriff Hale, secure the shoreline." Marcus gave a short nod and moved across the bank, boots sinking into the soft earth. He gestured for the board members to step back. They obeyed without a word. Even their clipboards seemed to huddle close to their chests, as if they were shields suddenly made useless. Elias Tanner drifted his rowboat toward the dock, the soft knock of wood against wood echoing in the quiet. "They'll find it," he said under his breath, eyes on the divers. "Your father said they would one day." I stared at him. "Elias, what exactly did he hide down there?" The old man ran a hand down the oar handle, his fingers tracing grooves carved by time and work. "Not hid," he corrected softly. "Protected." The divers moved with silent coordination, lowering a sonar device into the water. A soft mechanical hum vibrated through the dock, spreading ripples outward like a pulse. The display screen flickered with shapes, contours of the lake floor, shifting shadows, faint outlines. My heart kicked harder with each pass of the sonar wand. Bethany suddenly lunged forward, hysteria creeping into her voice. "Sheriff, stop this! You can't allow a federal dive without HOA authorization. I demand—" Marcus raised a hand firmly. "Bethany, you demand one more thing, and I'm putting you in the patrol car for obstruction." She froze, breath catching mid-syllable. Sarah approached her slowly. "You've been collecting unauthorized fees, enforcing unauthorized restrictions, issuing unauthorized citations." She tilted her head. "Tell me, were the federal notices you threw away also unauthorized?" Bethany's voice shrank to something sharp and desperate. "I don't know what you're talking about." "That," Sarah replied, "is the problem." A hush fell so thick it felt physical, like a blanket of quiet pressing down on all of us. The first diver eased into the water, the surface tightening around him as he descended. The second followed, bubbles rising in small bursts before fading beneath the still lake. Elias watched them until they disappeared. "North side first," he murmured. "Your dad said that's where the markers would hold the longest." "What markers?" I pressed. He hesitated, just long enough to let the wind fill the silence. "Federal environmental tags," he said finally. "Boundary markers, and a documentation case." "A case?" "A military-grade one," he said. "Your father sealed it, told me to keep an eye on it, said not to disturb it unless the lake was threatened." I felt my chest tighten. "Threatened by who?" Elias didn't answer with words. He simply tipped his chin toward Bethany. The sonar operator looked up. Agent Mitchell, we've got a hit. Solid object. Metallic. Rectangle shape. Sarah's expression hardened. Depth? 47 feet. Bethany staggered backward. No, that's impossible. There's nothing down there, nothing. The sonar tech didn't respond. He repeated the sweep. The blip appeared again, clearer, sharper. A rectangular shape buried in the silt, too structured to be natural. Sarah turned to her divers. Confirm retrieval. The divers adjusted their air tanks, clipped additional gear to their belts, and slipped beneath the surface. The bubbles quieted. The water stilled again. Minutes passed. Long, tension-thick minutes. Bethany paced in small, frantic circles, hands fluttering at her sides like she didn't know what to do with them. Her board members whispered frantically, glancing between the water and the ridge as if expecting someone to rescue them. Elias steadied his boat with one hand on the dock. "Told your dad this day would come," he said to me, voice low. "He said if the HOA ever tried to claim the lake, truth would have to surface." "What truth?" I demanded. Elias looked at me with eyes full of old storms and older secrets. The truth they buried 30 years ago. Before I could respond, the water broke. A diver emerged, hauling a dark green container, stained with years of silt, barnacles clinging to the edges. The second diver stabilized it from below as they maneuvered toward the dock. The moment the box hit the wooden boards, a tremor ran across the planks beneath my feet. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shock. It was the unmistakable vibration of truth breaking loose. Sarah crouched beside the container. "Seal's intact," she said quietly. "Military issue. Late 80s. Corps stamp." Bethany let out a strangled sound, somewhere between protest and prayer. Elias whispered, "It's his handwriting. Caleb Cole. That's your father's mark right there." Sarah looked at me. "Mr. Cole," she said gently, "before I open this, is there anything you want to say?" I swallowed the knot in my throat. "Just that I had no idea, not until today." Sarah nodded once. Then she cracked open the seal. A burst of air hissed out, cold, preserved for decades. Inside, protected by laminated sleeves and archival seals, were pages of Corps survey logs, water boundary charts, federal caution notices, and an audio recorder wrapped in waterproof military fabric. Bethany collapsed onto her knees, hands clutching the mud. Sarah lifted the top document, an official Corps certificate naming the lake as a federal navigable water and protected watershed, dated the year I was born. Her voice rang across the dock, across the water, across the very heart of the HOA's false rule. "This lake," she said, "was never HOA property. Not then, not now, not ever." The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, cracking silence of something large breaking apart. And as that silence settled over the water, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Everything was about to change. The air felt different, charged, almost metallic, as if the lake itself braced for what came next. The lid of the military container sat open on the dock, releasing a faint smell of old metal, preserved paper, and deep water cold. Agent Sarah Mitchell removed the top layer of documents with the slow respect one gives to evidence that might shift the ground beneath an entire community. Inside the case, beneath the bound folders and laminated maps, lay a second layer sealed under a clear carbon fiber panel. A dull red stripe ran across it, the kind used for warning classification. Elias exhaled sharply. "That's the one," he murmured. "Your father sealed that himself." Sarah slid the panel free. "Stand back," she said, though her voice carried more reassurance than alarm. She lifted the next item, a heavy steel envelope stamped with the Corps crest and the faded words, "Boundary confirmation, do not dispose." Sheriff Hale leaned over her shoulder. Folks don't stamp "do not dispose" unless someone tried. Bethany flinched like she'd been struck. Sarah opened the envelope carefully. Inside were laminated survey charts, crisp, precise drawings showing the lake's depth markers, the water inflow paths, and most damning of all, 3 federal boundary markers placed at the northern and western corners of the lakebed. Each marker had a date, a Corps signature, and a note verifying federal oversight. But the most telling detail wasn't the markers themselves. It was the notation at the bottom of the chart. Unauthorized removal attempts discovered, 1998, 2003. Probable interference, Willow Basin Estates development. My breath caught in my chest. Elias glanced at me, his expression heavy with memory. Your dad helped place those markers, marked the federal boundary so no one, no HOA, no developer, could claim the water. Sarah's voice sharpened as she read the notes. Someone tried to remove all 3 markers, twice. The board members went pale, their clipboards hanging like useless shields. Bethany's lips trembled. Those notes could mean anything. No, Sarah said. They mean exactly what they say. She reached deeper into the case and pulled out a small waterproof recorder. The device was old, but not broken, preserved by layers of careful sealing. Elias whispered, "That record's from the day your father and I finished the last survey." Sarah pressed the playback button. Static crackled first, then a familiar voice filled the air, a voice I hadn't heard since before he passed. My father. Survey log final entry, Willow Basin. The recording began. The sound of water lapping against the boat underscored his words. Markers secured. Boundary established. If this recording is being reviewed, it means someone is contesting federal rights. If so, contact Corp District Office immediately. The next words were quieter, almost personal. And Remy, if you ever hear this, do not let them bully people off what isn't theirs. Protect the lake. It's more than water. It's history. And it's ours to safeguard. The recorder clicked to a stop. For a moment, the only sound was wind brushing through the pines and the faint ripple of the lake brushing the dock. Sheriff Hale cleared his throat, blinking hard. Well, I'll be damned. Sarah exhaled slowly, then raised the recorder so everyone could see it. This is direct evidence of federal jurisdiction, unlawful interference, and attempted removal of federal markers. Bethany broke. I didn't remove anything, she yelled, voice cracking under its own weight. This is absurd. The HOA couldn't have known. Elias cut her off gently. Bethany, you signed the maintenance plans. I saw the paperwork before your board redacted it. You knew. The board members turned on her instantly. You said the markers were old drainage studs. You told us federal notices were junk mail. You said the Corps had relinquished oversight. Bethany backed toward the water, shaking her head violently. No, we were told. There was a memo. Jake said. She stopped herself, too late. Sarah locked onto the word like a hawk. Jake who? Bethany froze, breathing erratic. I don't recall. Sheriff Hale stepped forward. Bethany, if you're withholding names, you're digging your own grave here. Her eyes darted toward the ridgeline, as if expecting someone, anyone, to appear. Sarah set the recorder aside and examined the last piece in the case. 3 metal stakes corroded from decades underwater. Each one bore the Corps insignia and a serial code matching the survey map. These, Sarah said, are the missing boundary markers, removed illegally, buried underwater to hide the crime. The divers exchanged glances. One of them spoke for the first time. Agent Mitchell, we found drag marks on the lakebed. Someone tried hauling these toward the west inlet years ago. Sarah nodded grimly. Consistent with attempted relocation. A violation. Bethany dropped into the mud with a soft thud, her legs finally giving out. The morning sun glinted off her soaked blazer, illuminating the raw fear across her face. She wasn't calculating anymore. She was collapsing. Sarah didn't spare her a glance. She turned instead to Marcus. "Sheriff, take statements from the board members. Preserve all remaining HOA documents. No one is to delete or shred anything. They are part of a federal investigation now." Marcus straightened, nodding sharply. "You got it." I stared down at the recovered markers, rusted, heavy, undeniable, and felt a surge of something rise through my chest. Not triumph, not anger, something steadier, vindication. Elias placed a hand on my shoulder. "Your father knew they'd come for this lake, knew they'd try to twist the truth. That's why he left those records. He trusted you'd finish what he started." My throat tightened. "I never knew." He smiled sadly. "He didn't want you burdened unless you needed to be." Sarah stood up, holding the survey documents under one arm. "Mr. Cole," she said, "the evidence we've found isn't just proof. It's damning. This is federal obstruction, unauthorized jurisdiction claims, illegal fee collection, and possibly fraud." She turned toward Bethany, who sat shaking in the mud. "Your HOA," Sarah said, "is in very serious trouble." The wind swept across the lake again, carrying a cold, clean breath across the water. Ripples danced outward from the dock, as if the lake itself acknowledged its long-buried truth had finally been surfaced. And as the divers prepared to retrieve the final items from the lakebed, I knew this was no longer a conflict. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The Wyoming sun had climbed high enough to sharpen every detail around us: the shine on the wet dockboards, the worn grooves in the diver's gear, the nervous shifting of the HOA board members whose world had started cracking only minutes before. Even the lake looked different, calmer, flatter, as if relieved that the truth was no longer buried beneath it. Agent Sarah Mitchell stood with her boots planted firmly on the dirt, flipping through the recovered survey documents. Her posture held the kind of quiet authority that filled the air like a pressure front. Sheriff Marcus Hale kept a hand near his holster, not in threat, but in steady readiness, watching the board members who looked increasingly like passengers trapped in a sinking boat. Bethany Reed sat slumped in the mud near the log, elbows resting on her knees, fingers tangled in her hair. Her once perfect blazer was now twisted and stained, her hair sticking in damp strands to her cheeks. The HOA president, who had stormed into the lake with righteous fury, now looked like someone trying to piece together a story that no longer made sense even to herself. One diver surfaced again, lifting another item, this one a rusted chain once attached to one of the federal markers. Sarah pointed at it. "Photograph that. Everything matters." The diver handed it to the sonar tech, who sealed it in a transparent evidence bag. As the diver swam back out, Sarah finally turned toward the HOA board. "All right," she said, voice clipped and merciless. "We're doing this properly. I need everyone's statements." Bethany's head snapped up. "You don't need anything from us." Sarah didn't blink. Under federal investigation protocol, every officer or representative of an entity involved in unlawful boundary interference is required to provide a full account. "That doesn't apply to an HOA," Bethany snapped. Sarah angled her head slightly. "Ma'am, federal law applies to everyone." The first board member, the tall woman with trembling hands, stepped forward. I didn't know anything about this. Bethany told us the lake belonged to the community. She said the core paperwork was outdated." Bethany jerked her head toward her. "Don't you dare!" But the board member kept going, desperation leaking into every word. "She said the notices were mailed to the wrong address. She told us to ignore the federal documents. She said the markers were abandoned hardware." The second board member nodded vigorously. "She told us the development company had rights to the lake, That's why we approved the dredging budget. Sarah's head snapped up. Dredging budget? The board member swallowed. Bethany said cleaning the lake bed would help with insurance, but she told us not to file a state permit because it would slow things down. That didn't feel right. Sarah turned slowly toward Bethany. You performed underwater work on federally classified water without a permit? Bethany pushed herself shakily to her feet. This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything. The board agreed, everyone agreed, we were maintaining the lake for the community. Marcus stepped forward. Bethany, if your maintenance meant tampering with federal markers, you stepped way outside your authority. She pointed a shaking finger at me. This is his fault. He shows up with a deed, and all of you lose your heads. No, I said quietly. This started long before I showed up. You knew exactly what you were covering up. She froze. The divers radioed from offshore. Agent Mitchell, we've lifted the last item, bringing it in. Everyone turned. 2 divers approached the shore, dragging a long waterproof cylinder, battered, caked in silt, stamped with federal insignia. Elias's voice cracked with old memory. Good Lord, that's the original boundary tube. I haven't seen that since your father sealed it. Sarah crouched to inspect it. This should contain the original authorization and the full map set. Bethany's voice faltered, shrinking into a small, brittle whisper. Please, please don't open that. Sarah lifted her gaze. Why? Bethany's eyes filled with raw panic. Because it'll ruin everything. The board members took a synchronized step away from her. Sarah unlatched the cylinder with a sharp metallic click. Inside lay the laminated documents, pristine beneath decades-old seals. She slid the first one free. It was a core letter addressed directly to the Willow Basin Estates Development Office, dated the year the subdivision was built. The bold text read, Developer notification. The lake within your proposed boundary is a federally designated navigable water. No private entity may claim ownership or authority over its use, access, or shorelines. Underneath was a second notification. Do not incorporate this lake into HOA covenants. This is a federal directive. Sheriff Hale let out a long, low whistle. Bethany, you got something you want to say now? She blinked rapidly, chest rising and falling like someone drowning on dry land. I thought... Jake said... Sarah's voice sharpened again. Jake who? Bethany pressed a fist to her lips. Jake Mercer. Elias hissed under his breath. That developer snake. Marcus muttered, Of course. I clenched the railing of the dock. Jake Mercer was a notorious real estate developer in the region, slippery as wet gravel, always looking for ways to bend land use laws to his profit. Bethany's knees buckled again. She slumped into the mud. He said the lake wasn't really federal. He said we could expand the subdivision one day, build boat slips, increase HOA revenue. He said the Corps wouldn't care. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her voice cooled several degrees. Ma'am, knowingly following illegal advice from a private developer does not absolve you of federal violation. Bethany looked like someone watching her world collapse beam by beam. We just wanted more control. We thought, if we could manage the lake, we could fix the budget problems. That's not management, Sarah said. That's fraud. The board members nodded silently. Elias exhaled and leaned both hands on his oars. When you try to own something that doesn't belong to you, nature has a way of pushing back. Bethany stared at the ground, tears mixing with mud on her cheeks. Sarah addressed Marcus without looking away. Sheriff, begin collecting all HOA financial records. If they charged a single dollar for lake access or shoreline violations, that's unlawful collection under federal law. Marcus tipped his hat. On it. Bethany's breath hitched. You can't do this. We're a homeowners association. We make the rules. No, ma'am, Sarah said quietly. You made demands. You made threats. You created an illusion of authority. She lifted the boundary documents like a judge raising a verdict. But authority requires legality, and you never had it. The wind swept across the lake again, stirring the rafters of the pines and sending a whisper across the water that sounded like release. And as Sarah turned back toward her truck to retrieve the final declaration forms, Bethany Reed stared at the ground with the empty, hollow look of someone realizing the truth she'd fought hardest to avoid. Her house of cards had finally collapsed. The afternoon wind came off the lake with a dry rasp, ruffling the pines and sending ripples across the sunlit water. It felt like the entire shoreline was holding its breath. The divers waited in their wetsuits near the dock. The HOA board stood in small, defeated clusters, and Sheriff Marcus Hale remained just a few paces behind me, calm, steady, unreadable. Sarah pulled a black binder from the back seat of her government-issued truck. The metal clasps clinked sharply as she opened it, flipping through laminated pages with the cold precision of someone preparing a verdict. Bethany wiped her mud-streaked hands across her blazer, trying to regain even a sliver of composure. What are you doing now?" she asked, voice trembling just enough to betray the last of her defiance. Sarah didn't look up. Posting the official core declaration. Bethany swallowed hard, her lips quivering. Declaration of what? Sarah turned, holding a single white sheet. Thick paper, federal watermark, stamped with an embossed seal that caught the sunlight like a warning flare. That this lake, Sarah said steadily, is now, and always has been, federal environmental property. As of this moment, any HOA authority over it is terminated. She stepped toward Bethany. Every head turned. The wind went quiet. Sarah clipped the notice directly onto Bethany's aluminum clipboard, the one she'd carried like a weapon all morning. The metal snapped shut with a finality that echoed louder than the nearby waves. Bethany's breath hitched. You can't. It's done, Sarah said. The words hit her harder than any shout could have. Her legs gave out, and she dropped back into the mud with a soft thud, staring at the notice as if it were a death sentence. It was. Behind her, the two board members exchanged wide-eyed glances. Both took a step away from her, then another. One whispered, "Oh my God." Marcus cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am, you need to stay seated. The Corps is assuming jurisdiction now." Bethany's voice cracked. "We've managed this lake for decades. Decades. We held events, we issued fines, we controlled—" "You controlled nothing," Sarah said. Her tone wasn't cruel, just factual. "You acted on false authority. Now that ends." Bethany shook her head violently. "This can't be happening. This lake funds half our budget. You don't understand the politics behind this place." Elias Tanner stepped forward from the dock, leaning heavily on his oars. "Oh, we understand. We've understood for years. You just didn't think anyone would dig deep enough to prove you wrong." Bethany glared at him through wet, furious eyes. "You old man!" "Careful," Sarah said sharply. Bethany snapped her mouth shut. The shoreline fell into a heavy silence broken only by the soft slap of water against the rocks. It felt like the lake itself was waiting for the next blow to land. And land it did. Sarah closed the binder and folded her arms across her chest. "Mrs. Reed, the Corps began tracking illegal HOA water claims 3 years ago. Dozens of communities have been investigated. Most involve minor boundary issues or accidental encroachments." She paused. Her eyes locked onto Bethany's with surgical precision. "But your case is different. Willow Lake is the largest unauthorized HOA takeover we've seen." A collective gasp rippled through the gathering. Bethany blinked. "Largest?" Sarah nodded. You built docks, charged fees, wrote fines, and enforced rules on federal waters. That isn't a misunderstanding. That's organized overreach. The second board member whimpered. We didn't know any of this was federal. You knew, Sarah cut in. Maybe not all of it, but enough. And ignorance is not a legal defense. Bethany's breathing quickened, panic rising fast. I stepped forward. Sarah, what happens now? Her jaw tightened. Now we follow protocol. The Corps assumes control of the lake. We file violations. And we begin the federal review on the HOA's actions over the last 20 years. Bethany's expression flickered between rage and terror. Review? You're going to destroy my reputation, my home, my community. No, Sarah said. You did that. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Even the dragonflies hovering near the cattails seemed to freeze. Then Sarah reached into her vest pocket and pulled out one more form, this one smaller, but heavier somehow, as if it carried a different kind of weight. She turned it toward Bethany. This is a notification of federal inquiry into unauthorized collection of public access fees. Bethany stared blankly. No, you can't investigate me. You can't. You were charging families for access to a lake you didn't own, Sarah said. That's illegal collection of federal use fees. It's a felony. The world seemed to tilt sideways for Bethany. Her hands trembled violently around the clipboard. Everything we did, everything. It was for the community. Jake told me. He promised. He said nobody would ever look this far. Sarah froze. Jake who? Jake Mercer, Bethany whispered. Developer. Consultant. He advised me. Elias let out a long breath. I knew it. Marcus muttered. Mercer always finds a way into trouble. Sarah scribbled the name quickly. We'll be contacting him. Bethany tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Marcus had to catch her elbow to steady her. You'll receive formal notice soon, Sarah said. Whether the charges involve civil penalties or criminal investigation will depend on what else we uncover. Across the lake, a red-winged blackbird shrieked, its call sharp and haunting. The echo bounced between the tree lines. I didn't speak, I didn't move. I just let the wave of justice roll through the air like a slow, unstoppable tide. Bethany finally managed to stand, swaying on unsteady feet. Her voice broke in half. What happens to the lake now? Sarah looked at me. It took me a moment to realize she was waiting for me to answer. My lake. My father's lake. The lake that the HOA had tried to claim with nothing but arrogance and a stack of soggy paperwork. I inhaled deeply. The crisp scent of pine filled my lungs. It goes back where it belongs, I said quietly. To the people. To the truth. Sarah nodded once. Then let's make it official. She handed me the second declaration. This one addressed directly to the property owner. Me. As I signed it, the wind carried the sound of the pen stroke across the lake like the final ripple of a long-fought storm. Behind us, Bethany Reed stared into the water with the hollow, stunned realization that the power she'd wielded for decades had vanished in a single afternoon. And as the ink dried, Sarah slid the metal clipboard back into my hands. This ends today, Remy, she said softly. But the fallout starts now. The wind shifted, the trees creaked, and somewhere in that still Wyoming air, the faint echo of justice finally broke the surface. Morning light shimmered across the lake, soft and gold, casting long fingers across the water as if welcoming the dawn of something new. The Corps vehicles had left hours earlier, their tire tracks still pressed into the dirt like imprints of authority. The HOA board had scattered in stunned silence. their defeated footsteps crunching across the gravel as they disappeared back toward the subdivision that no longer controlled anything beyond its own fences. For the first time since I'd arrived at Willow Lake, the shoreline felt honest. No clipboards, no shouting, no false authority dictating where a man could stand on land he legally owned. Just water, pines, wind, and the promise of a new beginning. Sheriff Marcus Hale lingered near his patrol truck, arms crossed, hat pulled low, as he watched the last HOA member hurry away. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said quietly. Bethany Reed, brought down by her own clipboard. I exhaled a long, steadying breath. "Feels like the lake can finally breathe again." He nodded. "And so can you." A crunch of boots on damp earth drew our attention. Elias Tanner emerged from the dock path, moving slow but with the quiet dignity of someone who had waited a long, long time for this day. "You all right, Elias?" I asked. He tapped his oar on the dirt, eyes shining beneath the brim of his sun-beaten hat. "Takes a lifetime to see truth rise," he murmured. "Feels good when it finally does." I stepped beside him. "Thanks for guiding them, and for guiding me." Elias shook his head. "You guided yourself, son. All I did was stand where your father once did." We both looked out across the lake, now calm and bright, almost unrecognizable from the battleground it had been only yesterday. A heron glided low, skimming the surface with one wingtip like a signature across a clean page. Sarah Mitchell walked up from the last core truck, clipboard in hand. This time not Bethany's metal weapon of intimidation, but a federal document folder thick with sealed papers. She approached with the composed calm of someone closing out a case the right way. "Remy," she said, "I have your finalized declarations." Her voice was warm, steadier than before. The tension that had coiled in her shoulders earlier was gone. In its place was a quiet pride, maybe even a touch of relief. She handed me the forms, 2 signatures, 3 seals, and one bold, unmistakable truth stamped across the top. Federal Environmental Protection. Primary Oversight. Remy Cole, owner. It looked heavier than any weapon the HOA ever wielded. "You'll also receive copies by mail," she added, "and I'll be in touch about ongoing stewardship plans. We'd like to partner with you, monitoring, research, protection initiatives. You'll remain owner. We'll just help safeguard it." I nodded slowly. "I'd like that." Marcus tipped his hat. "Good folks doing good work," he said. "Feels like Wyoming again." Sarah smiled. "It'll take a few weeks to complete all investigations. The HOA might face civil penalties, maybe criminal inquiry, depending on what else we find. But your ownership is solid." Elias muttered, "About time." Sarah shifted her weight. "And Remy, you should know something else." I looked up. "That container we pulled from the lake? The audio logs from your father? They weren't just boundary records. They documented the early attempts by developers to override federal authority, attempts that someone inside the Corps blocked." "Who?" She hesitated, then spoke softly. "Your father." Something warm and heavy pressed against my chest. Wind rustled the pines, carrying the echo of a past I'd never fully understood. "He held the line," Sarah said, "even when he knew others wouldn't. Without him, this lake would have been paved over decades ago." I swallowed hard. "He never told me." "He didn't need credit," Elias said. "He needed a successor." Sarah placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've become exactly that." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The lake did the talking for us, lapping softly at the shore, reflecting the sky like a promise kept. By midday, residents began walking down, curious, cautious, drawn by the absence of HOA patrols. Families stood along the water's edge, whispering. For the first time in years, no one charged them a fee. No one told them to move back. No one cited bylaws. A small boy tossed a smooth stone into the water and laughed as it skipped 3 times. His mother exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. "Feels like we finally got our home back," she said to no one in particular. Elias leaned close. "Told you. Lakes never belong to boards. They belong to people." I smiled. "Then let's keep it that way." Weeks passed. The HOA crumbled under federal scrutiny. Bethany faced civil fines and potential charges. Nothing violent, nothing dramatic. But the slow, unsparing pressure of the law correcting a long-standing wrong. The community voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. Those who once enforced bogus rules now attended town meetings humbly, without power, without threats. Where their clubhouse once stood, a new federal environmental station rose. Simple wood siding, green roofing, wide windows facing the lake. Elias was appointed as honorary caretaker, showing up every morning at sunrise, oars in hand, the same way my father once had. Sarah returned regularly with her team, measuring water quality, installing monitoring buoys, assisting me with oversight. What began as an investigation became a partnership, professional, respectful, built on the common goal of protecting something bigger than any of us. Marcus stopped by most afternoons, leaning against his truck with a thermos of coffee and a grin. "Just making sure no new HOA sprouts up," he'd joke. And me? I rebuilt the old dock with my own hands, one board at a time, the scent of pine and fresh-cut lumber rising with every nail driven home. The water glimmered beneath it, clearer than before, no longer clouded by lies or threats or false authority. Every morning at 6:47 a.m., the same minute I first confronted Bethany Reed, I met Elias at the end of the dock. We'd sit with steaming mugs, boots hanging over the water, watching the sunrise crest over the hills. Sometimes Sarah joined us before her rounds. Sometimes parents brought their kids to learn about water ecology. Sometimes families simply stood there, soaking in the freedom of a lake that no longer belonged to a boardroom. One morning, as the sun painted the lake gold, Elias nudged my shoulder. "Your father would be proud, you know." I looked out across the quiet water. "I think he'd say the truth has finally surfaced." Elias nodded, and stayed there. The wind rippled across the lake, carrying the echo of the deepest lesson this whole fight had taught me. Some lakes don't need fences, gate codes, or fines. They need guardians. They need truth. And truth, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it, always rises. Always. If you've ever stood your ground against unfair rules or pushy neighbors, drop a simple "justice" in the comments, so I know I'm not alone out here. And if you want more real stories about land, dignity, and standing up for what's yours, go ahead and subscribe. I'd be glad to have you with me for the next one.